Hey there, welcome to the Yelan Complete Guide. In this video, I will go over her playstyles, kit, Ascension and talent priority, weapons, artifacts, constellations, my Yelan build, team comms, and showcase. You can find a quick summary on my website, which I will leave the link in the description. Subtitle can be selected in the settings, timestamp included as well. Without further ado, let's go. First, her playstyles. Here's a quick overview of what Yelan can do. Basically, Yelan is a Hydro DPS that deals Hydro outfit damage with an auto burst. She can move rapidly and attack opponents using her skill. Then, dealing Hydro damage to all opponents marked after her dash ends. Yelan also has a breakthrough buffs or BTB, which is a charge attack that has an 80% decreased charge time and deals an AoE Hydro damage. Most notably, all 3 attacks scale on max HP. Quite interesting design choice. Next, her kit. For normal attack, Yelan performs up to 4 consecutive shots with a bow, which deals physical damage. It is pretty cool to see her kick the bow. Normal attack multipliers are not high though, so for this talent, you can just focus on the breakthrough part. The BTB can deal pretty decent damage, but the condition is that Yelan must be out of combat for 5 seconds. There's another way to reset the BTB, which is through her plus skill, which I will talk about in a bit. In normal gameplay, this attack is great, and it can deal an AoE damage. But in terms of DPS and in a strict team rotation, you want to prioritize using the skill and burst. The charge shot looks awesome though, it's like looking at a shooting star. For the skill or E, you can either tap or hold. If you want to generate energy quickly, you can use tap E in front of an opponent. Yelan will then move swiftly, using lifeline to attack opponents, and deals Hydro damage. For hold E, it allows Yelan to move rapidly with a max duration of 3 seconds. During this time, Yelan is the fastest character in the game. She can attack all opponents, and once you release E or the lifeline explodes, all opponents are being dealt Hydro damage. Also, Yelan generates 3 or 4 particles, with a 10-second cooldown, no matter you use tap E or hold E, which is a reasonable amount. When the lifeline explodes, it also has the chance to reset her breakthrough state as well. There are 6 notable points about this individual skill. Number 1. No stamina is spent. In fact, her stamina is even generated a bit during her E. This is great when you use her in a team with melee DPS that use stamina for charge attack like Hotel, Klee or Kaching. Number 2. Phasing through enemies and traps. If you find yourself stuck in a corner as there are enemies blocking you, her skill allows you to get out of that situation. You can use it to bypass a trap like Mirror Maiden's Glass Cage. Number 3. Crowd control. After her lifeline explodes, small and mid-sized opponents are getting pulled in as you can see here. Although this ability is not as effective when compared with animal users, in a team in which there is no good stuff on an animal user like for example Ryan Shogun, Bennett, Shelling, having Yelan's crowd control helps. Number 4. Skill can damage to shield. You can deal damage to all opponents even if their shields are up. Number 5. No West status applied. You can see that there is a pattern with some Hydro units like Barbara, Xingqiu, Kukumi, but not Yelan. This helps when you fight cryo enemies as you don't need to worry about being frozen. Finally, number 6. Reposition. The fact that she is so mobile helps you position yourself in a favorable spot, which helps you save a lot of time when fighting enemies. Overall, her build skill has a lot of utilities and is a strong part of her Yelan's kit. Then we have her ability burst or Q, which is the main source of damage. When you activate her Q, there will be an exquisite throw that follows you around. When you either deals normal attack with any active characters on your team, or when Yelan's lifeline from her E explodes, 3 arrows will be fired off at the opponents at the same time. Yelan's burst is quite similar to Xingqiu's, with 1 line separate. The arrows from Yelan's burst have auto-checking mechanics, which is similar to Diana's E. As you can see here, although the rift hardly disappears, it can still retarget and hit the enemy. This is extremely useful when you hit mobile opponents like Spectre, Repounds, and so on. Let's also check the passive talents, which I think are quite interesting. Her first talent is the Quality of Life one, where it gives 25% more rewards when Yelan is dispatched on a league expedition for 20 hours. The second talent means that the more elemental types you have, the more Yelan's max HP is increased. This is interesting because it basically suggests that players should use more elements other than Hydro. You can see the jump from 60% with 1 element to 30% with 4 elements here. But with the current meta core like Yelan 2, Beta Singling, or Sar, it's a bit tricky to have a meta team core that has 4 middle types. My advice is that when you build a team around Yelan, you should just consider this talent as a nice to have. And last but not least, the A4 talent gives you damage increase when your Q is active. This is a good buff, as this is a damage increase, which means it works for all elements in the game, including physical, geo, animal, and the upcoming Dendro. There are 2 things to note about this buff. First, it is applied when your active character deals DPS. For example, if you use Xiangling to do her burst, if Xiangling stays on field, you will see the Pyronado damage increase over time with the A4 buff. But if you swap her out, the Pyronado reverts back to the original damage before the buff is applied. So this buff is good for your main carry that stays on field. And secondly, this buff counts as damage bonus, which is the same as auto damage, like Hydro damage bonus that you see on Goblet, the full 4% of surface set effects, etc. Damage bonus is additive. So if your character already has a lot of damage bonus from other sources, you will not see a large damage increase from the A4 talent. Alright, now that her kit is clear, let's move to the Ascension and talent priority. For Ascension, since still of few DPS, you want to level her to level 80 Ascended. This is because her Ascension start is crit rate, which is essential to her kit, so you want max Ascension here. Also, since the kit scales on HP, I recommend leveling up to level 90. The HP bonus from level 80 to level 90 is worth it. For talent priority, enter burst first, then do skill, and very normal attack. I recommend leveling her burst and skill to level 9 as the damage increase is worth it. If you have the resources and you enjoy playing her, you can consider crowning both these talents. For Yelan's weapons, first, she needs AER to get her burst off. Then, HP since it gives many skills on most HP and crit for more DPS. As Yelan doesn't need attack at all, you can safely ignore base attack on weapons and other attack stats. Based on this criteria, I recommend the free-to-play Favonius bow as one of her best choices. It gives a high ER and a passive that generates white particles for not only Yelan but also the whole team. Since her start is crit rate, you will likely have her at a high crit rate, which helps trigger the passive easily. Then you can consider Sacrificial Bow, which gives her 2 mental skills when the passive is triggered. One thing to note is that you should only consider this when you have this weapon on high refinements. Other than these two weapons, the free Feeding Twilight is also a good choice with its ER substat and useful passive. For 5-star weapons, Energy for the End is the best choice for her with its high ER and a passive that buffs the team. If energy requirement is satisfied, which I will talk more about in the artifacts section, you can consider weapons that can deal more damage. Since you ignore base attack completely, the 3-star slingshot with its crit rate start or recurve bow with its HP start is worth taking into considerations. For 4-star, Mon's Moon or the Stringless with its youthful burst damage increase are great choices. And for 5-star, Yelan's signature bow Aqua Simulacra is the best choice with its high crit damage and a passive that boosts her HP and DPS. Any other 5-star weapons that have crit like Polar Star or Sakura Harp are also good to increase her damage. Let's jump to artifacts. First, the number one priority is to have enough ER so Yelan can burst every rotation. So, you should know how much ER Yelan needs. This heavily depends on your weapons, rotation, team comms, how many enemies are on the fields, etc. For example, if you run Yelan at Constellation 0 with a very scalable R5, 2 per rotation, and the team has another high roll like Xingqiu, you can run ER around 150 to 180%. On the other hand, if you run Yelan Aqua Simulacra, 1 per rotation, and she is a single hero unit in the team, the ER needed is around 270 to 300% ER, which is a lot. My suggestion is that you should have enough ER for situations where it's difficult to gain external energy, like when you fight a single enemy and your team members don't generate a lot of particles. My recommendation is if you use 2 per rotation, you have around 175 to 200% ER, with 1 per rotation, 230 to 250% ER. You can check my videos here where I break down why you need so much ER in Yelan and energy chart tests on various weapons. Alright, as for artifact sets, the best in slot set is a full Emblem and Silver Fate set. This set gives you ER and burst damage, which are both essential stats for Yelan. A good thing is that since Emblem is also the best set for a lot of burst DPS characters like Xiangling, Iron Shogun, Xingqiu, Beidou, etc. If you did farm artifacts for these characters before, then you will likely have spare artifacts in your inventory. Then her next best option is that you can choose 2 pieces of 2 of these sets, Emblem Silver Fate, Celestial the Monolith, Prop Death, or Noblesse Oblige. If your team doesn't have anyone who run full Noblesse, you can consider using Yelan to run them. As for artifact main stats, you should run either ER or HP percent on Sands. Remember that ER is the number one priority. If ER requirement is met, you can use HP percentage. For Goblet, hydro damage or HP percentage. For Circlet, crit dam or HP percentage. The reason HP percentage is actually recommended for Goblet and Circlet is that right now we do have an HP percent buffer. For attack percentage, we have Bennett who can buff autonomous attack, and also other attack buffing sources like TTDS, Noblesse, or Tenacity. So, running attack on Goblet is Circlet, we have a diminishing return on the character's DPS. Of course, running hydro damage Goblet and crit Circlet are optimal, but HP percentage currently doesn't have a lot of buffing sources yet, so it's totally fine to run this stat on Goblet and Circlet. Finally, for artifact substats, first ER until the requirement is met, the HP percentage, crit rate, and crit damage. After this, you can consider flat HP and the mastery. Let's talk about Constellations. As I mentioned in previous videos, you should only get Constellation if you have available premium gems, and the Constellation is truly worth it for your gameplay experience. For Constellation 1, it essentially means you have 2E. This is without doubt one of the most useful constellations for a character. It not only helps her solve the high ER requirements, but it also helps her run a non-ER weapon or HP percentage stance, which helps increase her overall damage. You can check my video here where I explain why this constellation is great. For Constellation 2, a Q gains an additional arrow that deals hydro damage based on max HP. This helps Yelan apply more hydro on the opponents and deals around 35 to 30% more damage. With C0 Yelan in the Hutal team, Yelan cannot apply enough Hydro for Hu Tao to vaporize all her charge attack. So, with C2, this issue is solved. But if you are not a Hu Tao mains, then in most team comms, Hydro application is enough and you are fine with not getting C2. Next, C3 increases her Q by 3 levels, which is around 40% to 80% in damage increase. While C4 increases all party members' max HP by 10% for 25 seconds when Lap Life explodes. A maximum increase of 40% max HP is buff if you mark 4 or more opponents. This is a great support constellation, especially if you run Yelan when a DPS has skill HP like Hu Tao. The buff lasts 35 seconds, which is long, and you can easily refresh this buff with Yelan's E having a low cooldown of 10 seconds. While C5 increases her E by 3 levels, which is minimal damage increase. And with her C6, this helps all 5 Yelan's normal attacks change to breakthrough bobs after she uses a burst, which deals insane hero damage really quickly. Let me show you my Yelan's build. This is level 90, 33k HP, 80% crit rate, 28% crit damage, and 175 energy charge. Weapon, she's running Aqua Simulacra. Artifacts, full 4-piece emblematable fit set. Here are the stats. For Constellations, she's at C2, and finally for talents, 6, 9, 10. Let's move to team comms. Since Yelan is Hydro, we can build a team comms based on Hydro directions like Vaporize, Electro Charge, and Freeze. We can also build a team comm that uses a mix of these directions. All Hydro team comm is also mentioned. And finally, I will discuss the double Hydro Yelan and Xingqiu, which is the current meta duo. For each team comm, I will name one example and talk about the roles of each characters in the team. Alright, first we have Vaporize team where the main core is Hydro plus Pyro. An example team composites is Yelan, Diluc, Sucrose, and Bennett. Yelan can apply quick Hydro and deal good off-field DPS. Bennett can help boost attack, healing, and generate energy for Diluc. Sucrose can group enemies, lower power resistance with VV set, and transfer to mastery to the whole team. And we have Diluc, who is our main DPS in the team that can deal good Vaporize damage. Second, we have Electro Charge team where the main core is Hydro plus Electro. A good team comm to use is Yelan, Beidou, Fisho, and Sucrose. Yelan provides Hydro, Beidou and Fisho are a great Electro duo who can deal good AoE and single target damage. Sucrose is the main carry in this team that can continuously use the animal attack to trigger Electro Charge reaction. For those who want defensive utility, Beidou E can reflect damage and the Q creates an Electro shield. You can also consider running Prototype Ember on Sucrose for a bit of healing as well. Third, Freeze team. For instance, you can consider Yelan, Kaya, Rosaria, Diona as a quick swap team. Both Kaya and Rosaria can be used as DPS, as they have a low cooldown E and Q that applies Caro consistently. Diona is a good healer, shielder, and battery. Combined with a frozen nature, where enemies can't do anything, you need to worry about the defensive ability of this team. Fourth, Mixed Reaction team. Yelan, Ranshogun, Bennett, Xiangling is one of the best choices here. This Yelan Rational team is good with utilizing Overload and Vaporize reactions. Yelan, Xiangling, and Ranshogun can deal competitive DPS, which makes the team a great choice to clear difficult content as a Spiral Abyss. Fifth, Mono Hydro team. This is where you can use all Hydro or Hydro plus Animal. A good example of this is Kogumi, Yelan, Xingqiu, and Ayato. Yelan and Xingqiu can deal great off-field DPS. Kogumi can provide great healing and buff characters with tenacity and TCDS, while Ayato can be the main driver to deal Hydro damage with his normal attack. Alright, I also want to talk about a new meta core that is only briefly mentioned in my previous video. It is a double Hydro Yelan and Xingqiu, or Yexing in short. The best thing about Yexing is that they support each other well. Both of those skills generate a lot of particles, so energy is no longer a big issue. Yelan will not be tied up with the Favonius global, and the same applies to Xingqiu with Sacrifice Sword. You can consider running a more DPS weapon like Yelan with Aqua Simulacra and Xingqiu with Mistsplitter Reforge. This will essentially boost your team's overall DPS. The other two slots are flexible, since damage is secure with Yexing. You can pay other characters that fulfill other roles. For example, Yelan, Xingqiu, Zhongli, Hu Tao, where Zhongli is a great shielder who can also threat resistance. Hu Tao is a top tier DPS that can well use both Yelan and Xingqiu burst. Or you can use Jean and Barbara here who can heal, lower resistance, group enemies, and you have a team that is ready for Spiral Abyss. A great thing about this team is that Yexing allows you to free up Bennett. Not only does Yelan's kit scales on HP, which doesn't use Bennett attack buff, but also the DPS of Yexing is enough for you to not need to run Bennett. Furthermore, since Yexing burst follows you, it allows you to be mobile. For example, in a Bennett team, if your DPS doesn't have a snapshot ability, you are required to stay in Bennett's burst to gain the attack buff. With Yexing, you're not fixed in a spot. You can move to any position on the field and focus on dealing damage, which is really convenient. In Spiral Abyss, you can solely run Yexing in one half, and Bennett in the other half, and the other spots are flexible depending on your preference. Finally, Yelan can work well with future team comms with Dendro reactions. There is no official information about Hydro plus Dendro yet. However, since Yelan is an off-field DPS, and her A4 passive talent works for all elements, new characters can work with her. With the release of Sumeru and Dedro in 3.0, I look forward to seeing more new team comps with Yelan for sure. In conclusion, Yelan is one of the best characters that MiHoYo has created. Her skill feels so smooth. I also like the fact that her key skills on HP, which makes wielding weapons effectively flexible. Furthermore, as she is an of your high DPS, you can run her in many team comps. Also like meta teams, the new duo Yelan Xingqiu does not disappoint. All in all, she has aesthetics, damage, and utilities. And most importantly, she feels really fun to play. What a character. Alright, so if you find value in my videos, please consider a like, comment, and subscribe so I can release better future videos. Thank you all for watching. This is Tuan signing out.